The biggest problem in the world is not evil, it's stupidity. And the worst? Most people don't even realize they are part of it. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a German theologian and resistance fighter, had a provocative and unsettling view of human stupidity, a view that goes beyond a simple intellectual failure or error in judgment. For Bonhoeffer, stupidity is not just a weakness, it is a profound and destructive social force that paradoxically is far more dangerous than evil itself. He claims that stupidity is a form of resistance to critical thinking, an active refusal to reflect on actions, ideas, and their consequences. Unlike evil, which can be confronted and controlled by reason, stupidity is impervious to intellectual engagement. It resists awareness, self-correction, and the ability to change. Bonhoeffer's view highlights the important difference between ignorance and stupidity. Ignorance is like a dark room. Just turn on the light of knowledge and it disappears. But the stupidity? It's like someone who sees the light but chooses to close it and break the lamp, insisting that darkness is all there is. Stupidity doesn't just refuse to learn, it shields itself against any form of self-criticism. When faced with information that challenges her beliefs, she reacts with denial, anger, or mockery. And the worst, in a group, stupidity becomes even stronger. Entire movements can be built on simplistic ideas, manipulated by leaders who know exactly how to exploit this weakness. As a result, stupidity is not just a lack of thinking, it is the refusal to think critically, which makes it a treacherous and self-perpetuating force. In this sense, stupidity is much more dangerous than ignorance, as it closes the door to growth and understanding. This destructive mentality is expressed most terrifyingly in the historical context of authoritarian regimes, especially during the height of Nazism. We don't need to look into history to see this phenomenon. Today, millions of people spread fake news, reject scientific evidence, and follow leaders without question, not out of malice, but because they don't want the discomfort of critical thinking. As Bonhoeffer realized, the problem with stupidity is not the lack of intelligence, but the refusal to use it. What made this conformity so destructive was not the presence of active evil, but rather the lack of resistance from individuals who had become insensitive to moral and intellectual inquiry. Stupid people, driven by profound passivity, allowed themselves to be carried away by the regime's ideology, accepting its simplistic and dangerous narratives without question. The relationship between power and stupidity is another important point in Bonhoeffer's theory. When people reach positions of power, they often become less willing to think critically. Power structures reinforce this, rewarding conformity and punishing independent thought. Those in power often surround themselves with advisors and systems that confirm their biases, creating a vicious cycle of ignorance that is difficult to break. As a result, the powerful may become less self-aware, more resistant to alternative views, and more likely to obey authority without question. This dynamic creates an environment where decisions are made based on irrationality or incompetence rather than a logical thought process. Stupidity, in this context, becomes a powerful tool for maintaining oppression and injustice. The real danger lies not in the evil of people in power, but in their inability or unwillingness to deal with complex issues, question their own actions, or challenge the established system. Bonhoeffer's paradox thus reveals a dark truth. Those who are stupid, especially those in positions of authority, can be far more dangerous than those who act out of malice or evil intentions. Blind obedience to authority, refusal to question, and resistance to intellectual growth make us powerful agents of social and political destruction. In a world where critical thinking and self-reflection are increasingly devalued, Bonhoeffer's ideas serve as a clear warning about the destructive power of stupidity and the profound consequences it can have for society as a whole. But Bonhoeffer was not the only one to realize this danger. Decades later, political philosopher Hannah Arendt would delve deeper into this issue when analyzing the mentality of Nazi bureaucrats. While Bonhoeffer exposed how stupidity fuels oppression, Arendt revealed what happens when ordinary people, without questioning orders, become cogs in a destructive system. German-American political philosopher Hannah Arendt expanded on Bonhoeffer's ideas about stupidity by introducing the concept of the banality of evil. For Arendt, the greatest evil in modern society does not necessarily come from the most evil or monstrous people, but from the simplicity of the actions of those who commit horrible acts without reflecting deeply on their consequences. This concept, introduced by Arendt when analyzing Adolf Eichmann during the Nuremberg trials, shifts the focus from a person's inner evil to the alarming capacity of ordinary people to become agents of evil through thoughtless obedience and a lack of critical questioning. Arendt argued that Eichmann, one of the people most responsible for the Holocaust, was not an especially bad person. Instead, he was a bureaucrat who lacked the ability to reflect on moral issues and simply followed orders without considering the human cost. This banality of his actions does not diminish his responsibility. On the contrary, it shows that evil in the modern world can thrive not only in the hands of unbalanced people, but also in the hands of those who fail to think critically about their role in larger systems. Arendt's concept is deeply linked to Bonhoeffer's theory of stupidity, as it highlights the danger of passivity and conformity in individuals. Eichmann's way of thinking exemplifies a kind of thoughtless obedience, driven by stupidity rather than malicious intent. He did not act out of a desire to cause harm, but rather out of an unquestioning adherence to authority. Eichmann's failure to question his actions or reflect on their consequences demonstrates the depth of the intellectual and moral paralysis that can arise when someone refuses to engage in critical thinking. This intellectual passivity or stupidity allowed Eichmann to become a key figure in one of the most horrific regimes in history. The banal nature of stupidity in this context is not limited to Eichmann alone. Arendt suggests that modern societies are particularly vulnerable to this type of thoughtlessness due to strong pressures to conform and obey authority. Totalitarian regimes, especially, take advantage of this psychological and intellectual inertia. They depend on people's inability or unwillingness to think independently, creating fertile ground for propaganda and manipulation. By controlling the flow of information and reducing complex issues to simple, binary narratives, these regimes are able to cultivate a population that accepts their actions without question. This process turns ordinary citizens into instruments of tyranny, not out of malice, but through intellectual passivity and a failure to critically examine the world around them. Arendt's theory highlights how stupidity, when institutionalized in the form of blind obedience and thoughtless thinking, can maintain oppressive systems. The individual's refusal to question the authority of the state, disdain for moral responsibility, and failure to recognize the great consequences of their actions are all signs of the kind of thinking that allows tyranny to perpetuate itself. Arendt's vision is a call for everyone to resist the pressures of conformity, lest we fall into the trap of thoughtlessness and question the systems of power that shape our lives. She reminds us that evil often grows in the absence of careful reflection, and that our capacity for moral judgment depends on our ability to think critically about the world and our place in it. But the threat of stupidity is not limited to the past or to totalitarian regimes. Philosopher Bertrand Russell, observing modern society, realized that ignorance not only persists, but is actively encouraged and often rewarded. While Arendt highlighted passivity as a catalyst for evil, Russell denounced how political and social systems cultivate this passivity, promoting foolishness at the expense of intelligence. In today's world, the superficial nature of stupidity still manifests as the passive acceptance of unfair beliefs and rules. Whether at work, in politics, or when dealing with social issues, we often see people blindly following orders or adopting simplistic ideas without thinking about their larger consequences. This lack of critical thinking, which sometimes masquerades as loyalty or love for country, remains one of the greatest dangers to the values of justice and freedom. The real challenge is to help people wake up from this mental slumber, promote independent thinking, and ensure that those in power are held accountable for their actions. Arendt's idea of the banality of stupidity is a stark reminder that ordinary people, when trapped in the pressure to conform and stop thinking deeply, can unintentionally cause great harm. The important question is, how can we protect ourselves and our communities from this? The answer lies in encouraging critical thinking, self-understanding, and the courage to face authority and pressure from others. By doing these things, we can break the harmful cycle of ignorance and strive for a more thoughtful and just world. Bertrand Russell, one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century, was very concerned about the intellectual trends of his time, especially how society often rewarded ignorance and punished intelligence. He believed that foolish ideas, especially in politics and society, often trump smarter ones, and that this reality played an important role in shaping history. Russell's critique of society's admiration for simple populist ideas rather than deeper reasoning connects to Bonhoeffer and Arendt's warnings about the dangers of stupidity. But Russell went further, highlighting how society's systems not only allow ignorance to win, but actively encourage it. One of Russell's main points is that the structures of modern political and social systems often reward ignorance while penalizing independent thought and critical reasoning. In a world where complex issues are reduced to short phrases and slogans, the public is encouraged to adopt simplistic solutions that do not address the true complexity of problems. Russell saw this as a dangerous trend, especially in political discourse, where a leader able to present an easy-to-understand narrative is often more successful than one who offers a deeper, more thoughtful analysis. The result is a society where intelligence and reason are seen as a burden, and superficial and simplistic beliefs are exalted as a virtue. This intellectual climate makes room for the rise of foolishness over intelligence, as people are drawn to narratives that promise certainty and simplicity, rather than facing the uncomfortable complexity of reality. Russell's analysis also addresses the psychological comfort that comes with stupidity. People often find it easier to accept simple, all-or-nothing narratives that offer clear answers to complicated questions. Critical thinking, on the other hand, can be uncomfortable and challenging. It requires a willingness to face ambiguity, uncertainty, and contradiction, things that most people prefer to avoid. The call for simple answers, especially when reinforced by the media and political leaders, is extremely strong. Russell understood that while intelligence requires effort and reflection, stupidity offers a false sense of security. This preference for the comfort of ignorance over the discomfort of critical, reflective engagement helps explain why ignorance often trumps knowledge in modern society. But the problem doesn't stop there. Stupidity is not just an individual phenomenon. It spreads, strengthens, and replicates within societies. Irrational ideas, when repeated and socially reinforced, gain strength, shaping collective thinking and making ignorance not only tolerated, but celebrated. This is where an even more dangerous phenomenon arises: the social contagion of stupidity. This phenomenon is intensified by the rise of mass media and social media in the 21st century. Russell's observations, although made in the middle of the 20th century, remain very relevant in today's media landscape, where misinformation and oversimplification dominate. In the digital age, the rapid spread of ideas through social media platforms has created echo chambers, where people are only exposed to information that reinforces their existing beliefs. This contributes to the creation of ideological bubbles, where critical thinking is replaced by collective thinking. The spread of misinformation and the constant bombardment of one-liners make it harder for people to think critically about complex issues. The intellectual laziness fostered by these platforms creates an environment where ignorance is not only tolerated, but actively cultivated. Russell's critique, in this context, seems almost prophetic, as the digital age has only intensified the dynamics he warned about. In his essay, Philosophy and Politics, Russell also addressed the paradox that, in many political systems, intelligence and rational reasoning can be seen as subversive or even dangerous. This is especially evident in authoritarian or totalitarian regimes, where those in power often prefer a submissive and uncritical population to one that questions authority or challenges the status quo. Russell argued that the more intelligent and reflective individuals are in society, the more likely they are to see themselves at odds with the dominant political ideology and thus be marginalized or repressed. This creates a cycle where intelligence is not only devalued, but actively suppressed, leaving the field open for foolishness to thrive. As with Bonhoeffer's analysis of the relationship between stupidity and authoritarianism, Russell highlights the central role of intellectual passivity in allowing oppressive systems to persist. Russell's critique of the triumph of foolishness over intelligence serves as a strong warning. The process of rewarding ignorance and undermining critical thinking is not a passive phenomenon. It is actively promoted through political, social, and media structures. The consequences of this trend are immense. A society that values foolishness more than reason is more likely to adopt simplistic and dangerous ideologies, ignore important issues, and allow its political leaders to exploit the ignorance of the masses. Russell's ideas make us reflect on how our society may be encouraging a preference for foolishness and challenge us to question whether we are willing to face the discomfort of intelligence to resist the destructive power of stupidity. Through education, intellectual curiosity, and a commitment to critical thinking, we can begin to reverse the dangerous trend that Russell so clearly described and create a society where intelligence, not ignorance, is celebrated and valued. Stupidity, in many ways, is not just an individual failing, but a contagious social phenomenon. Ideas, especially irrational ones, spread quickly through societies, often gaining strength and support only through repetition and social reinforcement. This stupidity contagion is especially dangerous because it erodes independent thought and critical reflection on a collective level. The process by which irrational beliefs and simplistic ideas become widely accepted is not accidental. It is the result of complex psychological and social dynamics that encourage conformity, discourage dissent, and create environments where thoughtlessness thrives. From propaganda to peer pressure, the social structures that facilitate stupidity are powerful and deeply embedded in the fabric of society. The rapid dissemination of ideas, especially those that are not based on evidence or reason, is facilitated by mass media and social media. In today's world, information circulates at an unprecedented speed, and not all of it is reliable or reflective. Misinformation, fake news, and simplified narratives spread quickly, often gaining traction simply by being repeated over and over again. This repetition creates a false sense of legitimacy and truth, leading people to accept these ideas without questioning their validity. In a world where anyone can share information, the line between what is real and what is fictional becomes increasingly blurred, making it difficult for people to distinguish reality from illusion. In this environment, independent thinking is weakened by the enormous amount of information demanding attention, causing people to look for the simplest and most familiar answers rather than delving deeper into complex questions. One of the most dangerous aspects of the social contagion of stupidity is the role of social groups and peer pressure in reinforcing ignorance. Human beings are naturally social, and our need for belonging and acceptance often outweighs the desire to think independently. Social groups, whether political, religious, or ideological, create environments where certain beliefs and attitudes become normal, while dissent or critical reflection is discouraged. This dynamic is especially evident in polarized societies, where group identity becomes tightly linked to ideological purity. In these environments, people often stop thinking for themselves because they fear contempt or social withdrawal. The pressure to conform and the desire to be accepted are so strong that individuals begin to adopt the group's beliefs and behaviors without questioning them. Over time, this collective mindset leads to the widespread adoption of simplistic and uncritical worldviews, often disconnected from reality. Another important factor that contributes to the social contagion of stupidity is the role of authority and hierarchy in the formation of beliefs. From an early age, people are taught to accept the authority of figures such as teachers, parents, and political leaders without questioning them. In many cultures, obedience to authority is seen as a virtue, and critical thinking is often discouraged in favor of conformity. This is especially visible in totalitarian regimes, where dissent is punished and the government controls the flow of information. However, even in more democratic societies, respect for authority figures often leads people to accept their ideas without analyzing them. When leaders and experts make statements, especially about complex issues, many people simply accept their words without questioning the logic or evidence behind them. This submission to authority can be a major obstacle to independent thought, creating an environment where people stop thinking for themselves and start depending on others to define what is true. The danger of the social contagion of stupidity lies not only in the propagation of irrational beliefs, but also in their ability to stifle intellectual diversity and critical debate. When everyone in a social group subscribes to a set of unexamined ideas, it becomes more difficult to challenge those ideas or consider other perspectives. This intellectual homogenization leads to collective thinking, where people prioritize consensus and social harmony over independent thought and intellectual exploration. The result is a society where ideas stagnate, debates become superficial, and progress is hindered. And what happens when stupidity stops being a deviation and becomes the norm? We already know the answer. History has shown this before. Authoritarian regimes, persecution, genocide. It is not just an abstract philosophical question, but a repeating pattern that has shaped the course of civilization. Stupidity, when institutionalized, destroys entire societies, erases cultures, and turns individuals into tools for systems they don't even understand. And the worst, it always starts small. It starts with people accepting ideas without questioning them, with institutions that discourage critical thinking, with leaders who prefer obedient subjects to thinking citizens, until, one day, thinking differently is no longer just uncomfortable, it's dangerous, And when we get to that point, it's already too late. In this type of environment, intellectual laziness becomes the default, and those who dare to think critically or question the status quo are often marginalized or excluded. Escaping the social contagion of stupidity requires a conscious effort to resist conformity and cultivate independent thought. One of the most important strategies for this is to develop a mindset that values questioning, curiosity, and skepticism. Instead of accepting ideas without question, people need to learn to examine the information they encounter and ask difficult questions about its origins, logic, and evidence. This requires a willingness to step out of one's social comfort zone and engage with ideas that challenge one's beliefs. It is also necessary to have courage to stand out from the crowd and resist the pressures of collective thinking. Furthermore, developing critical thinking skills should be viewed as an ongoing effort, something that involves constant learning, self-reflection, and openness to new perspectives. In a world where the contagion of stupidity can spread quickly, these intellectual tools are essential for protecting the ability to think for oneself and contributing to a more reflective and discerning society. In the end, the social contagion of stupidity is not an impossible force to overcome, but it requires active resistance. By encouraging critical thinking, embracing intellectual diversity, and questioning authority, people can free themselves from the collective mindset that perpetuates ignorance. The spread of irrationality and conformity can be addressed through education, dialogue, and a commitment to independent thought. In doing so, we can reclaim the power of reason and ensure that intelligence and reflection continue to shape our collective future. In the face of widespread ignorance, manipulation, and intellectual passivity, escaping the cycle of stupidity is not just a personal challenge. It is a necessity for society as a whole. As we have seen throughout history, and especially in the ideas of thinkers like Bonhoeffer, Arendt, and Russell, collective acceptance of stupidity can have catastrophic consequences. However, just as these forces are social in nature, the strategies for resisting them are also social. In this last part, we will explore how the teachings of these thinkers can help protect us from falling into the trap of the contagion of stupidity. The secret is to cultivate independent thinking, nurture a commitment to critical engagement, and build a society that values intellectual complexity over simplistic ideologies. First, Bonhoeffer's theory of stupidity highlights the importance of ongoing intellectual engagement. To escape the trap of stupidity, we must dedicate ourselves to continuous learning and the search for truth, even when it is uncomfortable. Bonhoeffer's critique of passivity is particularly relevant today, as the pressure to conform and the temptation for easy answers are ever present. The most effective way to resist these forces is to constantly challenge ourselves to think critically about the world around us. This means not only seeking out new information, but also actively questioning our existing beliefs and assumptions. True intellectual growth requires humility and the ability to accept that we may be wrong. In a time when people often seek only information that reinforces their worldview, the courage to embrace complexity and consider opposing perspectives is more crucial than ever. Arendt's idea about the banality of evil brings another important lesson to escape the cycle of stupidity: the need for moral and intellectual reflection. Arendt showed that one of the greatest dangers in modern society is the willingness of ordinary people to give up their moral responsibility and intellectual autonomy in the face of authority. To free ourselves from this cycle, we must reject passive obedience and embrace our role as active moral agents in the world. This means developing the ability to question authority, deal with challenging ideas, and take responsibility for our actions. As Arendt argued, a lack of reflection is not only a personal error, but also a social one. Therefore, we must make resisting thoughtlessness and encouraging critical thinking a collective task, creating spaces where independent and critical thinking can flourish. Bertrand Russell's critique of the triumph of foolishness over intelligence calls us to recognize the systems and structures that actively promote ignorance. In many modern societies, intelligence is devalued and stupidity is rewarded, especially in the political field. To protect ourselves from the influence of stupidity, we must recognize the intellectual forces that shape our world and be aware of the media, political ideologies, and social structures that perpetuate simplistic and reductionist thinking. Russell believed that society often rewards conformity and punishes dissent, especially when it comes to complex and challenging issues. To escape the cycle of stupidity, we must cultivate the courage to question dominant narratives and resist the forces that try to simplify complicated issues into catchphrases and slogans. Critically engaging with the world, rather than simply accepting what is presented to us, is the first step towards intellectual freedom. The media, especially social media, is one of the main drivers of the spread of stupidity in modern society. It is in this environment that ideas are simplified, distorted, and quickly spread. Social media algorithms, which seek to maximize engagement, often prioritize emotional and sensationalist content over deeper, more thoughtful speech. This creates an environment where ignorance thrives and critical thinking is left aside. To protect ourselves from this, we must become more attentive consumers of information. This involves developing media literacy skills and learning to recognize bias, misinformation, and propaganda. By questioning the sources of the information we consume, we can begin to free ourselves from the influence of social media information bubbles and seek more reliable and complete perspectives. Another strategy for resisting the influence of stupidity is to surround ourselves with people who challenge our thinking and encourage intellectual growth. While the pressure to conform is a powerful force, we are also deeply influenced by the people around us. By building networks of individuals who value critical thinking, diversity of ideas, and intellectual honesty, we create a balance against social pressures that encourage conformity. These relationships can provide the intellectual nourishment needed to resist the pressure of groupthink and create an environment where new ideas can flourish. Therefore, it is essential to prioritize relationships with people who encourage reflection, debate, and intellectual curiosity. Furthermore, cultivating a culture of intellectual humility is essential to escaping the cycle of stupidity. Humility in thought allows us to realize that our knowledge is always limited and that we still have a lot to learn. It frees us from the intellectual arrogance that often accompanies certainty and invites us to engage with the world in more open and curious ways. In a society where people often feel pressure to appear confident and sure of their opinions, intellectual humility is a rare but valuable quality. By cultivating this humility, we can approach the world with more curiosity, willingness to learn, and ability to grow. In the end, escaping the cycle of stupidity isn't just about resisting external forces. It's also about cultivating internal resilience. We need to learn to trust our own ability to think critically and question what we are told. This is especially difficult in a world where misinformation and oversimplification are everywhere, but it's not impossible. By continually challenging ourselves, questioning authority, developing intellectual humility, and cultivating a community of independent thinkers, we can protect ourselves from the influence of stupidity and become active participants in creating a more reflective and thinking society. In conclusion, The ideas of Bonhoeffer, Arendt, and Russell offer a powerful roadmap for escaping the cycle of stupidity. Although the forces that perpetuate ignorance are strong, they are not invincible. Through a commitment to continuous learning, moral reflection, intellectual courage, and social responsibility, we can protect ourselves from the contamination of stupidity. In doing so, we ensure that critical thinking and moral integrity remain central to our personal lives and the health of our societies. In the face of the all-encompassing influence of stupidity, we need to become the resistors, the thinkers, and the questioners who shape a better, more enlightened future. As we explore throughout this video, the influence of stupidity in our society is a powerful and dangerous force, capable of shaping political landscapes, social dynamics, and even our personal beliefs. But by understanding the mechanisms behind it and adopting the lessons of thinkers like Bonhoeffer, Arendt, and Russell, we can protect ourselves from falling into the trap of intellectual passivity. It is up to each of us to cultivate critical thinking, resist the pressures of conformity, and commit to continuous learning to break the cycle of stupidity. If you found this discussion interesting and are eager to explore these complex ideas deeper, don't forget to like and subscribe. We post new videos every day, helping you gain valuable knowledge on a variety of thought-provoking topics. For those who wish to further enrich their understanding, check out the link in the description and the pinned comment with a selection of recommended books, which will take you on a journey of intellectual exploration. Stay curious, engaged, and most importantly, critical. Until next time, keep questioning and keep growing.